Hey YouTube, this is Archangel for Truth, and today my video or my audio recording for you today is actually a review of the live chat that I had with Artie the Lawyer as we debated over the questions of sovereignty. Now, mind you, the initial intention was to go over 10 questions each, but as we progressed in our discussion, we had to make some adjustments for that. We had some connection issues in the live video feed, so I will be able to pause for those and go forward in explaining things in a little better way. Sometimes hindsight is always a little better afterwards. So I'll begin by playing this video. And so basically, I just want to reiterate that, whenever it comes to debates between sovereigns and statists, I often find that it ends up being a debate that ends up being disrespectful. People basically will say things against each other, and ultimately it loses the value of the debate. Because at the end of the day, we should all be able to agree to disagree if that's ultimately what must happen, but we can still be respectful towards each other. And that is really what I advocate. And I'm thankful for Artie because he was very professional with me on his live chat. And, even though there were a few comments made from the chat or the live chat feed commentary, ultimately, I would say the fact that we were able to have a good discussion about these things and ask our questions and have a little better understanding where we come from was something that I felt was beneficial. And I wanted to address several issues with Artie, issues that oftentimes get ignored. Now, I do want to say before I start this video that it's not to say that I haven't raised these issues, but many anti-sovereign channels out there have either blocked or banned me. So that's why, you may not see a lot of my arguments out there. And ultimately, I just present them here on my channel as best as I can. And so I don't have all the technical know-how that, many people do with these things, but I do what I can with what I got. So here is the live chat. It's going to be a long live chat. So if you wish to stop and take a break, by all means. Ultimately, I think it really addresses the issues at the heart of the matter. And those issues are, again, sovereignty. Individual sovereignty versus state sovereignty. So let us begin.
Is Archangel. He has been on my comments and in my live streams earlier. We've had our own back and forth before, and today we're going to have a more structured discussion than we had last week. This time it's going to be more of a, we're going to have 10 questions for each other. We'll have chances to respond, and we'll go from there. So please introduce yourself, and I'll set the timer.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Artie, for hosting this live chat. And I'm Archangel for Truth. Basically, I would consider myself a Christian sovereign constitutionalist. Not a sovereign citizen, but ultimately I do believe in the Constitution, and I certainly believe in the Declaration of Independence, and of course, most importantly, I believe in God's Word. Many of you do know me already. Some of you have blocked me, but that's okay. And ultimately, I believe the best way to resolve any issues in the matter of law is ultimately to go to the original source of all law, which is God's law. And so, with that being said, I do have a scripture here I'd like to begin with. It's taken from Ephesians chapter 6, verses 12. For our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the world rulers of this darkness of this age, and against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. And with that being said, let us begin.
All right, thank you very much for that. So, like I said, this is, hey, what's up, D-Gen? This is Archangel for Truth. As I said before, the way we're going to do this is, that we agreed upon beforehand, is we are going to have 10 main questions that we have for each other. From there, and we'll be alternating back and forth. From there, we're allowed to have up to 2 follow-up questions, and we're given leeway to explain ourselves. In terms of answering the questions, we're given leeway to explain ourselves, but we all both understand to make sure that we don't end up, going off on a tangent, rambling, that sort of thing. So try and keep ourselves around 2 minutes to respond. So in that regard, I get to go first, and the first question that I have for you, Archangel, is do you believe yourself to be subject to any laws passed by man, i.e. a local, state, or federal statute passed by a legislature? If not, why not?
Well, that's 2 questions. But so do I believe that I'm subject to the laws of men? The answer would really depend on what the laws are. So, yes, in some sense, but no in others, depending on what it is.
Okay, so if you say depending on what it is, what do you have a criterion? I guess that'll be my last follow-up. Do you have a criterion in which what laws you feel obligated to follow?
Yes. So the laws that I would choose to follow would be those laws that do not inhibit any of my inalienable rights or freedoms, and that I believe are beneficial. So with that being said, ultimately I would decide whether or not each law was something that I needed to observe or not. So, is that your question answered?
Yeah. I mean, I'll probably have to. I only actually have 8 main.
Okay.
Just in case I would have 2, and I might have a follow-up to that later on. So I'll go ahead and end it right there, and then it's now you can ask me something now.
Yes. So basically, my question is, I'd like you to respond to what Judge Neil Gorsuch says as it pertains to the Ninth Amendment, and ultimately how it is that rights are So I'm going to pause it right there, because when I tried to access the audio recording that I had for Supreme Justice Neil Gorsuch, I was unsuccessful in retrieving that. What happened at that point was my laptop froze up. I find it interesting that it would freeze up like that, and I never had that problem prior to this, so ultimately I wasn't able to share that audio clip at that point, but I was able to retrieve it later on, so I did so. So at this point, I do go on to my next question that I asked Artie, and here it is. My question is, and I get this a lot from people that are anti-sovereign or don't believe in the Declaration of Independence. They say that it's not a legal document. What is your belief as to the legal standing of the Declaration of Independence?
My standing on the Declaration of Independence is that it is not a legal document. It is a statement of principles.
Okay. Okay, so he says it's merely a statement of principles. Now, there's a problem with that, because as I illustrate, that any document that has been ratified is in fact a legal document. And so I don't know why or where he got that idea that it's not a legal document, but it's a common one that is held by many anti-sovereigns. And so ultimately, we can debate whether or not something is a legal document and say, well, we're going to consider this a legal document, we're going to consider this not to be a legal document. The problem is when the same process that is incorporated in establishing the Constitution as a legal document is being utilized. Now, it may be by a separate Congress, it may be by different individuals altogether. With all that being said, that is irrelevant. Ultimately, we can say then, if we can say that the Declaration of Independence is not a document that needs to be legally recognized as one that has been ratified, then that really makes every other document ratified without legal merit. And we know that that is not the case, because the courts and the judicial system have to refer to the legislature and whatever they produce out of it as in their duty of interpreting what the legislature has produced as an example of laws, and this is something that Artie recognizes in Justice Scalia's review of one of the cases which he's going to mention. So I'm going to continue to play that. So I have a follow-up question. Are documents that are ratified by both houses a legal document?
Are ratified by both
You know, the Congress and the Senate. Are you there? Hello? Hello? I forgot this is an area where Artie loses signal, or I lose signal. I'm not sure which, but either way, I'll play the part where he reconnects. Hold on. There we go. I don't know what happened.
Hey,
I was disconnected. So I didn't.
No worries.
I never got the answer to my question on.
The question you had was, is a bill passed by both houses
a legal document?
Well, if it's passed by both houses and the president, yes.
So,
signed by the president.
We know that it was. The Declaration of Independence was, in fact.
By Congress?
Yes.
Which Congress, though?
By the very first one.
The Continental Congress?
I don't know if it's called the Continental Congress, but basically those individuals that chose to agree upon it at the time of its ratification.
Well, here's the thing. That was actually part of my questioning was regarding this, because like I said, I saw a couple of your videos previously, so I had a question on this very topic.
Okay.
But I can incorporate that here.
Okay.
Is you say that it was ratified by Congress, but the thing is that the Declaration was decided upon and ratified by the Continental Congress of 1776. The Constitution itself wasn't ratified until 1789.
Okay.
Or 1789 or 1791. So there's no way that the Congress, as we know it today, is the same Congress that ratified the Declaration of Independence. Do you agree?
So, basically, what Artie's doing is he's not answering my question. He's trying to go roundabout and avoid the question by establishing an argument about whether or not that particular Congress was the same Congress that ratified the Constitution. Now, regardless of whether it was or if it wasn't, and as far as my understanding is, it was the same Congress. Now, it may have called itself some other name at the time, it doesn't matter. But the simple fact is the same people that made the determination that the Declaration of Independence was a document that needed to be ratified are the very same people that are ratifying the Constitution. So the process is exactly the same. And so Artie's argument that, well, because it's a different Congress than one we're used to, that it isn't a legal document, regardless of the fact that it's ratified, is just not an argument that is well established or accepted even by this government. So, Artie, if you happen to hear this, I hope that, you will take a closer look as to the ratification of the Declaration of Independence and how the fact that according to the laws of this land, according to this governmental system that you choose to be part of, a ratified document is in fact a legal document, regardless of whether it is the Declaration of Independence or whether that ratified document is the Constitution. And it is subject to judiciary review for legal interpretation. And so, as such, it should be accepted as at least having the same weight as the Constitution. And I'll explain later on why, because I actually addressed this later on in the chat, why it is that the Declaration of Independence has the same weight as the Constitution itself. And ultimately, I don't want to go out of the order of how we chatted, so I'm going to continue with the chat and comment as I see fit. I wouldn't agree. And
why not?
Well, basically, what you're saying is that because one was done before the Constitution, that it makes the other invalid. What, in that case, what makes one valid and one not? I mean, they're both ratified by the same process.
Well, I'm not saying that the Declaration it's referred to. I will see, that's where I disagree, because like I said, the Congress, because there are two Congresses before the Congress that we know of, the House and Senate, even existed. There was the first Continental Congress that drafted and ratified the Declaration of Independence, and then there was the second Continental Congress that came together and formulated the Constitution itself.
So, Artie is basically saying that any, I guess, the Declaration of Independence specifically, that was ratified by the Congress prior to the Constitution is not valid. And so he's not answering it, but he's trying to present these reasons why, you know, he considers it not valid. Well, if that being the case, if the Founding Fathers and the Continental Congress, as Artie is referring to it, was not valid, then that makes that whole process of the governance and the government as it was being founded invalid as well, Artie. So, I mean, the argument really, you know, that you're making really makes no sense. It really doesn't. You know, so I, again, encourage you to reconsider your position on that and consider the implications of discounting the Continental Congress because, hey, they were the first ones and we're not going to consider what they did as being valid or legal. Okay, so either way, you know, that really is, we're going around Cock Robin's barn, and, you know, to answer a very simple question, which was, is a ratified document, ratified by both houses of the Congress, a legal document? Now, we know absolutely that the Declaration of Independence was in fact ratified. There is absolutely no question that it was ratified. And it was ratified in the same exact process as the Constitution. And so, for us to simply say, well, you know, these people had it right, but these people had it wrong because, you know, we don't want to accept the document that it produced. Well, I mean, it kind of makes the second invalid if you can invalidate the first. So I'm just saying.
From there, it's upon ratification in 1791, then you had the actual Congress that was elected by the first, 13 states.
Right. So what then really is the difference between the first one in the way it was established and the second one? Basically, you have individuals that chose to establish a governmental system. All they are is people. There's nothing different about them. They're just each deciding to establish a means of governing over them. So I guess my question would be to you is, what's the difference between the first that established the Declaration of Independence compared to the second, where you have the people of these 13 states, man-made states, that decided to do the same in a little different way? Now, before I go to his answer on that, I want to point out that if we can invalidate the Continental Congress and say, well, we didn't have states there, then we can do the same with the Constitution. Because here's why. The Constitution, according to Artie's argument, is being ratified only by 13 states. It's not being ratified by 50 states as we know it today, as this government has expanded out to include other states, man-made states. So really, then, the Constitution would really only be binding upon the original 13 states. If we were to eliminate the Continental Congress on the basis that, well, the Congress changed, so therefore that made the Declaration of Independence invalid because we now have a new Congress with 13 states in it. Well, we have a lot more man-made states now, and they weren't there at the founding of the Constitution, and therefore, by that same process, Artie, that you're arguing, does that not invalidate it, just as you would claim that the Continental Congress is invalidated by the formation of 13 states? I disagree, but we'll go to your answer as to these things.
Well, because the first was a declaration of, as the title, is the Declaration of Independence. At the time, the 13 colonies were still under British rule. And in fact, even after they won the Revolutionary War, they spent 10 years under an entirely different system of government before the Constitution itself. It was under the Articles of Confederation. So there was an entire system of government in place for 10 years between the end of the Revolution and the formulation of the Constitution. So that's the difference. One is the Congress of the Constitution is under a separate and new form of government. And even if there's overlapping members of the same body, there are more than likely members who were part of the First Continental Congress who ended up becoming the first representatives and senators of the respective states, who were the same. That does not mean that that you would point to the Declaration as an actual enacted body of law when it wasn't ratified by the first Congress in the first place. entity.
Well, okay. So I hear what you're saying, that it's a separate entity. So what Artie's saying there is not accurate. That it wasn't a Congress. It was a Congress. And ultimately, it was represented by the two separate houses that represent the Congress. So Artie, your statement there is incorrect, but we'll go on. So that doesn't make it invalid, though. If we're saying the Constitution is valid because some dudes decide to say it's valid, and the same process was established for the Declaration of Independence, you have a situation where you have an understanding being established of, okay, what's the purpose of government? Okay, and so in even judicial decisions are determined by their understanding of laws that are established by the legislature. So if judges are required to take into consideration that, then why would you certainly say that it's not valid today?
Well, I would disagree. Well, here's the thing. I would not characterize my position as the Declaration of Independence being invalid. My statement is that the Declaration of Independence is not a law from which somebody could point to in a cause of action. In other words, somebody cannot go file a lawsuit against an entity under the premise and cite to the Declaration of Independence saying, you know, the county, Monmouth County, deprived me of my pursuit of happiness for X, Y, and Z reason. That's where I'm coming from when I'm saying that the Declaration of Independence is not a law in that sense. Now, it is referenced. Now, I've seen plenty of decisions where...
So, here is where Artie recognizes the fact that Justice Scalia makes note of this in his decision. And so it is noteworthy because if it is being accepted as a means of interpretation for judicial review at the Supreme Court, certainly that should establish that, hey, you know, they're taking this in consideration of its legal aspects and how it impacts the Constitution. So again, you know, we're going this tug of war, as I posted on the image of this audio recording, is one that is wrestling around this issue. This huge issue is really about sovereignty, and ultimately, are people sovereign? And if so, do they have a right to form a government? Do they have a right to reject a government? You know, I mean, that is really what we're really getting at here. Because as we all know, that our founding fathers rejected the English governmental system, which basically was the King of England making demands upon them and wishing to infringe upon their inalienable rights. And so they decided, and Artie will say, well, it was the Continental Congress that formed this declaration. of Independence that basically is describing under what premise that this new government that they're forming is to be based upon. And so his legal argument on this issue is, again, one that I completely disagree with. And individuals that really read into what the Declaration of Independence is saying, the process of which it came about, all recognize that the Declaration of Independence is indeed a fundamental document that was important to this nation. And so if we cannot accept that its impact upon judicial interpretation, if we cannot accept that it is a contract being established between the people and the government, that this newly formed government that they're establishing, then there's a problem, because it lays out conditions which the people are accepting to build this government on. And so, again, it's like any house that you build. You have to build it from the foundation. And once you've built up beyond the foundation, you don't then thus say, well, the foundation is no good because now I have the structure. No, that doesn't make any sense at all. So we'll continue with the video.
The Declaration is referenced in terms of interpreting the intent of the founders and the framers of certain aspects of the Constitution, such as, for example, in the DC versus Heller case for gun rights, Justice Scalia pointed to the Declaration of Independence as a reference to understanding the intent of the framers at the time. But when it comes to this is an actual law that I can cite to, in other words, this person in the same way that somebody said this person deprived me of my Fourth Amendment rights, I can't simply say this person deprived me of my right to life, liberty, and property. That's where I'm coming from when it comes to the Declaration.
Okay, well, I mean, I would say that that's, a personal decision to view it that way. Just as we view the Constitution and we accept the Constitution, that's, I would also say, something that is a personal decision. Ultimately, if you look at what is the Constitution, when you really boil it down to its most basic, fundamental, what it is, what is the Constitution?
Is that a separate question you're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you, what is the Constitution?
It is a document that sets out the system of government for the United States of America and also lays the foundations of its powers and limitations on powers, as well as, when we're including the Bill of Rights, enumerating what rights the citizens of the United States have.
Okay. So what he says there is very interesting because the Constitution really is more for a limitation on the government than a limitation upon the people. And that is made ever so clearly by the Ninth Amendment, which we actually will go into and address. But I just wanted to point out that, again, Artie, you're saying that the Constitution is valid when it was only being ratified by only 13 states. Well, no longer 13 states anymore. So does that make the Constitution invalid? Just like you're saying that the Declaration of Independence was invalid because it didn't have all the states together at that point in time? I mean, you know, it seems like such an arbitrary argument to invalidate a document. But ultimately, you know, what I'm really trying to get at here as regards to what the Constitution is, and why I'm asking Artie, you know, what is it when you boil it down to its most basic element, you know, or what is it at its most basic, you know, from a legal standpoint? Well, it's very simple. It's not just a document, it's a contract. And that's what I'm really getting at. It's a contract that is signed by certain individuals and accepted by, at least at the founding, 13 states. So, being that contract is accepted and established by those, when this government claims that it's subject to that contract, and it's supposed to be subject to that contract, then when it should breach that contract, it makes the contract no longer valid. And any good contract lawyer would tell you that you know, a contract becomes null and void when once one of the parties breaches the contract. So my question, I guess, would be for you all is, has the government ever breached that contract, that the constitutional limitations placed over it? Has it ever done so? And if it has, then can we now consider that that contract is invalid? That's the question that you need to mull over your mind. But we'll continue with the audio. A follow-up to that would be, would you not agree that the Constitution is a contract?
Not in a literal sense, no.
Okay.
It's a social contract. In other words, it is an agreement amongst the populace saying, you know, here are the rights that we are entitled to. Here are the powers that government is granted, and the expectation is that they are subject to the laws that are duly passed under that Constitution.
Okay, well that I would say is open to interpretation. Do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Sure. And this guy, and like I said, while you were gone, I was also mentioning this to the others. You, in your videos, and I've noticed that you assert that the right to travel is protected under the 9th Amendment. Do you have any precedential backing to this, or is this a personal argument that you have formulated yourself?
Well, it would actually go to the video that I wanted to play for you, and I think I might be able to play it now. Let me see if I can. And let's see here. I'm going to see if this is going to work this time, and how I would answer that based upon what even Supreme Justice Gorsuch, although he was just a nominee at the time, we know that he's a justice now. So I'm going to go ahead and play that video now that I have it.
It's not been much interpreted by the Supreme Court. the views about its effect and its meaning. And I don't doubt that there'll be cases and controversies in which I would, if confirmed, and maybe even if I'm not, asked to construe the meaning of that. It's one of those amendments that hasn't had a lot of judicial attention. We've talked about some others.
There's a publication in 1950 I read called The Forgotten Ninth Amendment.
Right.
So that's 60 years ago.
Well,
It was forgotten then.
Senator Lee's written a book that includes some discussion of this as well. Judge Bork referred to it one time as an ink blot, seemingly implying that it could just be ignored. Is there any precedent that we need to know about to understand the Ninth Amendment as it comes down through the court? There are amendments that have been less interpreted and more interpreted. The Ninth Amendment is one of those that has been less interpreted, Senator. What's the best way to understand how the Constitution divides power between the federal government, the states, and the people? And in particular, how do we know whether or not some power that has not been specifically enumerated and given to the federal government, since the people give the government power, the government doesn't give us rights, the people gave the federal government certain enumerated powers. If it's not enumerated, how do we know if it belongs to the states or to the people?
Now, I want to just explain real quick here. This is the person that's questioning Judge Neil Gorsuch is the Nebraska senator. And so I just wanted to include that.
Senator, we talked a lot about federalism this last few days. The people in this country are sovereign. As Lincoln said, it's a government by the people, for the people.
Okay. So we clearly have here that Judge Neil Gorsuch is clearly stating, and this is very important because, I'm not a judge. I'm not an attorney. I don't have any, say, legal schooling, if you will. But if we cannot accept, here's an interpretation given from a Supreme Justice nominee and now Supreme Justice as regards to what sovereignty means and how sovereignty is really a possession of the people, and that this government is by and for those people, then ultimately, Artie, I would say that your understanding as it pertains to sovereignty, as it pertains to what the meaning of the Ninth Amendment means, what the Declaration of Independence is saying, and the 10th Amendment, when it's referring to or to the people, it's talking about that sovereignty. And really, that is something that is being ignored by states. And this is why we have a issue of discussion as it pertains to traveling or driving or any other unenumerated right that is of the people. And so the problem is, you have states that decide, okay, well, we want to make this law or make this regulation, whatever. Okay, that's fine. That's for them to decide to do. But there's a problem. And that problem is if a state regulation or a statute or whatever should infringe upon a unenumerated right, it is actually doing what it's not allowed to do, which is denying and disparaging that right. Now, as I said in my audio recording with Artie, I recognize that, a lot of states are not going to understand the Ninth, because even Judge Neil Gorsuch confesses that it's not an issue that the courts have really dealt with a lot. And I think that that is exactly why it needs to. That's exactly why these issues need to be addressed from a Ninth Amendment unenumerated right. And so I would say, at very least, if we can accept Justice Gorsuch's understanding as being true, as being understood by your average individual as being, what is sovereignty and who has it, then we must conclude that that sovereignty is a possession not just of the state, but of the people. And that is really the issue at heart here, is sovereignty. Who has it? Who can deny it? And ultimately, what we do with it. So I will continue with the audio recording. So, as Judge Neil Gorsuch pointed out, there hasn't been a lot of cases as it pertains to the Ninth Amendment. But a fair reading of the Ninth Amendment is clear as to its meaning. And so I would... Go ahead.
I would say, is it?
It is, Artie, and here's why. When the senator is asking Judge Neil Gorsuch, what does it mean? He says it means what it says. Very simple. So, this idea that we're having to make it more complex than it actually has to be is not what the Judge Neil Gorsuch is saying. He says it's simple. I say it's simple. For whatever reason, you don't feel it's simple, or at least are questioning its simplicity, but we'll go on.
Oh, absolutely. The reason I say that is because even in that audio quote, in the beginning, I don't know who was saying it, but they said that the Ninth Amendment is subject to interpretation.
So, the subjectiveness of the interpretation that it's referring to is, as Judge Gorsuch points out, it's the people's. Okay? So it doesn't belong to the states. And I add, even though he is a justice, he's not even making reference to it to the judiciary. So, again, Artie, I feel that your standing on these issues, is lacking the support. And at least myself, as an average Joe from Kokomo, trying to argue these questions of legality, I'm referring to a Supreme Justice and his own opinion, as regards to this. So, I would say at very least, you'd have to consider that what I'm saying is accurate based upon the fact that it's in agreement with your own Supreme Justice. So we'll continue with the audio recording.
Was it not?
Right, but he also says that the Ninth Amendment is determined by the people. That's what he says. He says the people are sovereign, not the states, the people. So, that's coming from a Supreme Justice, and so we can say that it doesn't exist, that individual sovereignty doesn't exist, but I would say that when a Supreme Justice is saying otherwise, there may be a legitimate reason not to jump away from individual sovereignty?
Well, the reason I would say that is because for those in the chat who are unaware, here's the exact language of the Ninth Amendment. Quote: the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed or to deny or disparage others retained by the people. End quote. Now, my issue here is, and I think this is a reason why the Ninth Amendment has not been brought up a lot by SCOTUS, is because what are those others? How do you define what those others are? Those other rights, and that is left open to interpretation. So whether so going from there, anybody can imprint whatever they feel like into the Ninth Amendment and say, that was, that's one of those other rights that's not stated in the Bill of Rights, but it's one of those that the Ninth Amendment covers. And I think.
So basically, what Artie's trying to say here is that it can be applied to anything that anyone wishes to say is a right. Okay, let's assume that it's just this, it's a broad brush that can paint anything the way we want to paint it. Okay, what's the problem with that? I mean, really, the founders, they had the right and the means to utilize that brush in enumerating the Constitution. What gave them that right? Were they somehow better than we? Do they have more rights than we do? No. We are equal. And even, if we were to apply the 14th Amendment, the equal protection laws as it pertains to the Constitution, then we have as much right as the founders did in forming our own government. Like it or not, Artie, that is the reality of what the Ninth Amendment is really basically all about. And as I point out in the audio recording, that basically the Constitution itself, see, we only think of, well, what are the unenumerated rights that the Ninth Amendment can possibly referring to? Well, guess what, folks? The Constitution itself, those enumerated rights were at some point unenumerated. So the fact that some men decided, hey, let's write these rights down on a piece of paper, didn't make them any greater or less than those rights that are not enumerated. And that is really what the Ninth Amendment is saying. It's saying that there are other rights that are not enumerated, and that those that are being written shall not be used to deny or disparage these others. And who gets to decide what these others are? Well, the Ninth Amendment tells us. It says that that these rights are retained by the people. It's not saying retained by the state. It's not saying retained by the government, nor by the judiciary. And this is a point that I make with Artie. So we'll continue with the video so you can hear exactly the argument I make with Artie as regards to this.
Many judicial scholars have said that that's not exactly the right way to look at the Ninth Amendment.
Okay, Artie. He's saying that many judicial scholars have said. Okay, well, many judicial scholars have said the other way as well, Artie. So I invite you, Artie, to list those judicial scholars that said to the contrary, and let us actually see what they have to say. I mean, I don't know that they are judicial scholars or not. You're saying that many have, but I mean, you know, how do I really address that when you're not actually quoting someone? Where I'm here actually quoting a Supreme Justice, you're simply saying, well, many scholars would say otherwise. So it's kind of hard for me to address that particular claim without any sort of backing or proof that you have these many judicial scholars that would argue differently. So let us continue on with the audio recording. Well, if we go, now I don't know, what your stance is on determining laws, whether you're a textualist or you believe that it changes with the times. But, if we go according to the text, what the Ninth Amendment actually says, it tells us who are the ones that determine what the ninth is. Basically, it says that the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by who? The people. Doesn't say the states, doesn't say the government, and it doesn't say the judiciary. It says the people. And that helps to clearly demonstrate that the people are those that are sovereign.
Would you say that a duly elected legislature that is voted into office by the people to be representatives of said people?
Would I say if they're representatives of the people? Is that your question?
Yes.
They're representatives to those people who choose to accept them as representatives of them. You see, what many individuals fail to realize is the fact that even the Constitution, those constitutional rights that we believe in and that we hold to be so sacred, were at some point unenumerated. And so the fact that they're now being enumerated doesn't give them any greater weight than those that are unenumerated. It just means a group of people decided to list a couple of the rights that we have, inalienable rights.
So going back to my original question, you are saying that the right to travel, you are interpreting the Ninth Amendment to include the right to travel as among those unenumerated rights that's protected under the Ninth Amendment. Is that correct?
Absolutely, but not just. So there is a difference between the right to travel and the right to drive, but I would say that the Ninth Amendment covers both.
Okay. And the reason why I say this, the reason why I brought this question up, is because SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States, that's what I call SCOTUS, by the way, if you didn't know. SCOTUS in Shapiro versus Thompson explicitly stated that they do not ascribe a citizen's right to travel, and explicitly a right to travel, not the right to drive, throughout the United States to a particular constitutional provision. In other words, what in the footnote of Shapiro versus Thompson, they reference state and federal cases that point to federal and state courts referring to that the right to travel is under the Privileges and Immunities Clause of Article 4, the Privileges and Immunities Clause of the 14th Amendment, the Commerce Clause, the Due Process Clause, and the Due Process Clause of the 5th Amendment. There's no mention of the 9th Amendment in any of those cases that SCOTUS cites to. So, going back to my original question, do you think that your reference to a 9th Amendment argument is backed up
Supreme Court chooses to review a case, it does so based upon the arguments presented. And so if a Ninth Amendment argument isn't put by the individuals that are pleading their case, then they're not going to review that. And that's a common occurrence within many court cases. If you choose not to bring something up in a court case, that's your failure. That's your personal failure on that level. And many times they won't even let you reopen that case on those arguments because you failed to bring them up. You know that as a lawyer that is true. So my statement is that those that argued for the right to travel failed to even present the Ninth Amendment as an argument that they would have argued before the Supreme Court. That was their choice. I don't know why they didn't choose to argue it. So when the Supreme Court made its decision, it tailored its decision based upon the arguments presented, not other possible constitutional arguments that were not presented.
Okay, so just again, I would just to get so I can get a definitive answer, and then you can ask me something. This argument that you're presenting of the Ninth Amendment is something that you are bringing up yourself, because largely nobody has brought it up yet. Is that what I'm saying? Is that what I'm getting from you?
Are you asking me, has anyone else used this argument in a right to travel case? Is that what you're asking?
Essentially, yes. Correct.
Okay, so as far as I'm aware of, no one I know, and I have looked for cases on this, has used the Ninth Amendment, but as was clearly indicated by Justice Gorsuch, that the Ninth Amendment is really something that the Supreme Court or the courts in general has done very little in addressing. So, to be fair, I would say that it's still something that is open to debate.
Okay, I mean that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, your turn now.
Okay. So my question is as it pertains to the text. So before I go into my question, you see that is really the crux there, because I'm presenting an argument that the Ninth Amendment applies to the right to travel, the right to drive. And ultimately, what Artie was trying to do is he's trying to use a court case as it pertains to traveling and saying, well, the court already considered this issue, and so it should be a resolved issue. And basically, it's not a resolved issue because I'm presenting a new argument to the issue as it pertains to the Ninth Amendment. And so when the justices gave their opinion, they did not include the Ninth Amendment because it wasn't something that was being presented to them in the cases. And Artie is well informed as a lawyer to know that if there are things that you don't present in your case, odds are you're not going to be able to include it later on. And certainly the judges aren't going to assume it. So in this case that he's referring to, the judges don't mention the Ninth Amendment, and therefore, as a result, it still is open to debate. It's open to for a determination by the Supreme Court. Do we have a right to travel? Do we have a right to drive based upon the Ninth Amendment? Now, that's the question that gets at the heart of the matter. Okay? Do we have rights that are unenumerated and that they still retain, that we, the people, are still able to retain? Because if not, if the answer is no, then what we are doing is we are saying that the Constitution is denying and disparaging those unenumerated rights, because we've concluded that because they're not being listed, they're no longer considered to be rights. And that is not what the Ninth Amendment says. I don't care what law book or what law school you go to. That is the opposite of what the Ninth Amendment is saying. And so that is really the heart of the matter. And it's so important and fundamental to an individual's sovereignty. And that's why it was included in the Bill of Rights. And so, Artie, I would argue that, yes, indeed, the Ninth Amendment is the basis for the right to travel and the right to drive. They may not be enumerated by the Constitution, but nevertheless, they are rights that, well, some of us do choose to retain. Now, states may deny and disparage these rights, and there may be courts that deny and disparage these rights. But the simple fact of the matter is, as the Ninth Amendment clearly stipulates, that these rights are rights that are retained by the people. And as such, they need to be recognized by the states, and they need to be recognized by the judiciary as well. And we need to remember the fact that just because the Constitution enumerates certain rights, as the Ninth Amendment clearly says, that enumeration shall not be used to construe or to deny or disparage those other rights that are retained by the people. And so that is so very important to understand. That fundamental understanding is, I would go so far as to say that if a judge does not understand the Ninth Amendment, that is probably why we have a lot of rulings the way we have them, and why we observe that the states are now wielding so much authority to regulate every aspect of human life. I mean, we have states regulating trash bags and straws and you know, such arbitrary things. And so they have abused their authority by coming up with all sort of safety issues that they want to justify why they're going to do this or do that, and why you can't have the right to do this or the right to do that. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, that is denying and disparaging unenumerated rights. Call it what you will, but that is what it is. So we'll continue on the audio recording. 10th Amendment. And I'll read the 10th Amendment so that, you know, everybody has an understanding of it. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. What does it mean, or to the people? That's my question.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? You said, what does it mean to the people?
Yeah, so basically we have people that argue that the power to police people by the states is reserved in the 10th Amendment. Okay. It does say that the power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, but it also adds or to the people. My question to you is, what does it mean when it says or to the people?
I would say it means that the rights of the people are reserved in respect to, at least in my understanding and in my learning of the law, that it's respectively protected depending on the circumstances of each case that's brought before it. In other words, there are times when the 10th Amendment was just as quiet in terms of interpretation as the 9th Amendment. In recent years, that it has been brought up more often, particularly in terms of Commerce Clause interpretation. So I would say that the rights of that phrase "to the people" is relatively limited, because the 10th Amendment is largely reserved in interpretations regarding the sovereignty of the states. In other words, the states' police powers, their powers to handle affairs of property, of family, of criminal law. So the issues of "to the people," I feel, is about as quiet, or isn't as explored as you would say with the 9th Amendment.
So we got to understand what Artie is saying here is merely from his own understanding. It's not something that is described in the 10th Amendment at all. We certainly can assume that if the powers that are reserved respectively to the states or to the people are powers that are not delegated to the United States. These are not just the simple powers that are just weak in comparison. Basically it's stating that this power is reserved to two entities, and it doesn't make a distinction really between those two entities, but it recognizes that both of these entities have this authority. And so it says are reserved respectively to the states or to the people. It doesn't give us all this other stuff that Artie's trying to fill in, to say, well, it only applies to states to that degree, but when it comes to the people, it really doesn't apply to the people the same way. That is not there at all. Let's understand that. That's all filler, that Artie is putting in there, and ultimately he does refer to some case that he's arguing, the courts have reviewed this issue, but in this particular part of the 10th Amendment, the courts have not addressed, where it's referring or to the people. And that's part of the problem, because when you have a legal interpretation on, an amendment, you can't just read part of it and exclude part of it and say, well, we're not going to include that into it, even though that is part of the text. And this is why I have a lot of problem with a lot of judicial interpretation. It's because a lot of judicial interpretation is just way out there. It doesn't fully include the full fullness of the amendment. And so, in order for us to understand the interpretation, a true understanding of the interpretation, we can't cherry pick parts of the amendment that we like and want to accept, and then we'll just cast the other part of it as being insignificant. No, not at all. We cannot accept that. And so, therefore, if we're going to accept it as being having the weight of law, as having the, a legal impact, we have to accept it as whole. And the whole of the 10th Amendment clearly stipulates that these powers are reserved respectively to the states or to the people. And this is an argument that I actually debate over with, and I tried to get another attorney to address it, Steve Latos. I actually did a video about that, which of course he chose to not to respond to me. He's one of those YouTube channels that blocks me because he doesn't want to address these fundamental issues. And there are other channels as well that do the same. But we'll go back to the recording here.
So, is your private interpretation on this backed by any court cases that you're aware of?
I can point to you the more recent cases that have Supreme Court cases that have dealt with the 10th Amendment, and in those cases they are specifically discussing the authority of the states to pass laws, and not necessarily an interpretation of what the phrase "to the people" means.
Well, it says "or to the people," and that's
or to the people.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Yeah. So basically, then your interpretation really isn't backed by anything the judges have set out. If we accept their interpretation,
Well, no, I guess no more than your interpretation that the right to travel is covered by the 9th Amendment.
So I'm just wanting to understand what it is that causes you to have that interpretation, and as you say, my interpretation of the 9th, I would say that a fair reading of the 9th would render that conclusion, and the fact that the Constitution itself, those enumerated rights, were at some point unenumerated. So, I mean, I would say that at least there's a historical representation that backs what I'm saying. I don't know of any historical judicial decision that would come to the conclusion that you've suggested based upon what "or to the people" means in the 10th Amendment. Now, I will say that I am part of a group, and it's basically the 10th Amendment Center, Law Center.
So when I mention this group, I mention that I'm part of it. I want to clarify something on that. So I'm subscribed to the 10th Amendment Law Center with Michael Bolden, and I listen to his live feeds and comment on it. So I consider myself as being part of it, since it's something that I do on a regular basis. And I have addressed these issues with Michael Bolden, asking these very same questions, but yet, and mind you, as I will state in the audio recording, that Michael is an attorney, and so as a result, Michael has a completely different answer than Artie does. And he agrees with me as it pertains to the people's rights, the people's 10th Amendment powers, that they have an equal power as the states does, according to the 10th Amendment and according to historical representation of the 10th Amendment. And I can tell you this much. I mean, as much as I know, and I try to spend as much time as I can learning about the laws and the Constitution and so forth that are, have been established. And so, as much as I know, I am not, someone that has all the knowledge as regards to these things. I will say this much, though, that Michael has a lot more knowledge as regards to the 10th Amendment than I do. And so if here is an attorney, and I mentioned him only for the sake of saying, well, hey, I've addressed this issue. I brought this issue before the 10th Amendment Law Center, and, basically the determination that has been made by them, by Michael and those that are part of that, is that what I'm saying as it pertains to the 10th Amendment and the people's rights that are within the 10th Amendment are indeed according to what I've been stating with Artie. So, ultimately, I'm trying to establish that what I'm saying here in this whole video, when I'm making these representations, I'm not just, pulling them out of my ass, as it were. I'm quoting Supreme Justice. I'm quoting Judge Napolitano. I'm mentioning the 10th Amendment Law Center and other individuals as proof that I'm just not accepting. I'm not just saying these things from my own words, but there's backing that backs them. Whereas Artie, he would say that there were many scholars, as what he said earlier on. Well, okay, who are these scholars? At least I'm giving you the video clips of what is actually being said by these legal scholars, whether it be Judge Napolitano or Justice Neil Gorsuch. There's their own words there being represented. I'm not misrepresenting them at all. I'm letting them say what they're having to say on the issue. And ultimately, it's up to those that listen to this whether or not they're going to accept that. If you're not going to accept it, that's a personal choice. And I will say that Artie, I would say that Judge Napolitano is a legal scholar. And most people would agree with that assessment as well. So, I would say to you that here's a legal scholar. I'm presenting to you as it pertained to, the ability of the government to govern people through the consent of the governed. And so that's an issue that we go into. But ultimately, again, at least what I'm saying is being backed by other individuals that do have these legal, a legal background. I'm not just pulling it out of a rabbit's hat or whatever. So anyways, we'll go on with the audio recording.
And I've presented this very same argument. And the gentleman who runs it, his name is Michael Bolton. And basically, he would agree with my view that the or to the people gives to the people the same powers that the states have. And he's an attorney as well. I just want to make clear to your audience and everyone that watches this, I'm not an attorney. What actually got me into all this was an incident where my car had gotten taken, seized, and actually it was no fault of my own actually at the time, but basically someone had moved my vehicle out onto the street, and it got taken basically. And so from then on I decided, hey, you know what, I need to understand what's going on here, because as far as I'm concerned, and most individuals would say, that's theft. And ultimately, I do want to say that, you know, even if we read the 10th Amendment, as you say, that the states have these police powers, the problem is you wouldn't have states without people. So the very idea that a fictional object has sovereignty over those that created it seems absurd.
I don't know why you would think it's absurd. I mean, the concept of a state, nation, country having sovereignty over the citizenry has long been a thing. It's not exactly a new concept. The concept that the state is subject to the will of the people through elective representation, that's relatively new in terms of human history. But the concept of a sovereign of one, or a sovereign of a governance, has long been a thing. It's not exactly a new concept here.
Well, I'm not saying that it is a new concept. I'm just saying that it's a concept that is man-made. It's, you know, it's not original to the founding of creation, basically. I mean, let's see, I forgot whose turn it was on the question, so...
Here's one of my questions that goes into this.
Okay.
Goes directly into this. It's kind of a hypothetical, and it kind of goes into your story. If you were wronged by someone, i.e., somebody battered you, assaulted you, damaged your property, how would you seek remedy? In other words, how and to whom would you go to enforce your rights or to seek redress?
Right. So, practically in the system that we live in, I would probably utilize the court system, but before I used the court system, if I knew who that individual was, I would try to go to them and reason with them and deal with them one-on-one. Because the reason why I say that is because that's actually how the Bible describes that we're supposed to deal with one another. It says, if you remember that you have something against your brother, go leave your gift in front of the altar and go make your peace with your brother. You see, if he listens to you, you have gained him. If he doesn't, then you involve others in the process. So that as I said before, I'm a Christian sovereign constitutionalist. So first and foremost, I would incorporate what I believe as a Christian in resolving any issues. Then, you know, I would continue the process as was necessary.
But ultimately, if you are dealing with somebody who is not acquiescent, you would go to your local or state judiciary and seek redress, or to a local law enforcement to seek redress, correct?
Yes, I could use those avenues. I could also It really depends on the situation, to be honest with you. I mean, if I'm dealing with an individual that's, out there killing people, yeah, obviously I'm going to use the system that is put in place to deal with that.
The thing is, the reason why I asked this question is because a lot of where you're coming from is dealing with this acquiescence to the system, acquiescence to the government system, and it seems to me that you feel that the people, in other words, an individual person like myself, and I, have the right to no longer become part of said system. And so, I'm sorry, I apologize, I'm kind of cheating here. Does that mean that the people have the right to opt out of following the laws of their respective state or country of this fictional entity and still be allowed to remain within its jurisdictional territory?
Okay. That actually goes to a very important question that I have for you.
Sure.
And my question to you is, to whom does the earth belong?
Depends on who you ask.
Well, I'm asking you.
God.
Okay. We would agree that God owns the earth. So, what was God's intention for the earth, for man, based upon what we know, or what you've accepted?
What? I'm sorry, say that again?
What was God's original intention for man as it pertains to the earth?
Go forth and multiply. It's been a long time since I've opened up the Bible, to be honest.
So, it doesn't say go forth and multiply, although it's not too far off from what it actually says, Artie. What it actually says is go forth, fill the earth, and subdue it. Which is, ultimately what I'm getting at here with my question, as it is to Artie, is he's wanting to establish a jurisdictional authority. And the problem exists that, we're dancing around this issue of, who really owns these areas, these territories, these land masses we're calling states. Okay? I mean, does it belong to the people? Well, I mean, technically, it doesn't even belong to the people. It belongs to God. And so, there is a problem because what we observe in reality, what we observe is all these varying nations separated themselves into these different groups that covered various geological locations. And so they formed different sorts of governments to govern over them. But their formation of governments never gave them ownership of those areas. The ownership of the earth belongs to God. And He gave it for all humanity to share. He didn't establish it so that just a few can say, or determine, okay, well, this is where only these people can go and be. No such thing.
In fact, if we even look at nature itself, you know, one thing I disagree with, and I just want to include this in this video, is I disagree with the wall that Trump is building, because it's cutting off access to parts of the earth that we should all have access to. As I said, this land area that we call the United States and their respective states does not belong to us. Doesn't belong to past generations or future generations. It belongs to God. And He has given it for all of us to share equally. And this is the problem. You have governments that want to limit the freedoms of people, want to determine, well, we're going to only allow this here, and if you don't like it, you got to get out. Well, who gave you that authority? I mean, if you have that authority, don't I have the same authority to say, sorry, no? So that again, it's going to sovereignty, individual sovereignty. And ultimately, you know, as I discuss these issues, it's very important to recognize God's sovereignty above all sovereignty. You know, and this is why, you know, the scriptures actually deals with this issue, because what you had in Jesus' day, you had individuals that tried to establish laws and traditions and commands of men that they were requiring of the people of that day when Jesus was here on earth. And Jesus clearly says, you know, because of your traditions, because of the commands of men, you are making the words of God invalid. So these commands, you know, of these men, of these varying governments, they're actually making the words of God invalid as it pertains to people's freedom and rights. You see, if we're not going to recognize the creator of all these things as having jurisdiction over them, then why would we give any greater credence to those that He created to have a greater authority, or even an equal authority? So, logically speaking, I mean, if we just deal on a logical standpoint, not even a legal standpoint, but a logical standpoint, the ultimate determination as it pertains to jurisdiction, you know, God is the one that has the jurisdiction, not man, not governments. It's God. And that is really where I'm coming across these things and trying to express them to people, you know. And you can accept God, you can reject God. You know, that's something that I would say, you know, people really need to consider. Because God, although owner and creator of all these things, is not forcing His will upon you to force you to live, you know, according to His will. He gives you that free will to reject Him. He gives you that free will to choose to do what is right or choose to do what is wrong. He allows you to do that, despite the fact that, hey, this is His territory. So that being the case, you know, with God, you know, for a government or for men to say, well, you can't do that because we're going to claim greater authority over you than you have over us. Well, where's the equal protection under the law with that, Artie? It doesn't exist. So we'll continue on with the video or audio recording. Okay. I understand. So here's why I'm asking this question. I'll use an example to illustrate what I'm getting at. So let's say God left us a house and we're all his children. And with that house, there was an attached property. Wouldn't we assume that if God said, okay, I'm leaving you this, you all need to share it equally, and nobody has any favoritism over one over the other, that each individual would have an equal right to use that as they saw fit?
Well, I don't know if I would accept that in an interpretation, because as far as my understanding of the Bible, nations existed. You know.
Well, okay.
You know,
What you're saying?
Rome, for example, was very clearly in the Bible, was it not? And that was considered a sovereign state during that era.
So, in the case of Rome, you have what Jesus says: pay Caesar's things to Caesar, but God's things to God. But now here's the question: what really are Caesar's? I mean, if you get down to it, what belongs to Caesar?
Whatever Caesar decrees.
So if Caesar decrees that your life belongs to him, it belongs to him?
Well, that's according to Caesar. Yeah.
So if Caesar decrees that the earth belongs to him, the earth belongs to him?
I'm sure that's something that he would love to say.
Right. But we both know, and most individuals would agree, that even Caesar's life doesn't even belong to him. Okay? Now, Jesus did clarify, as regards to the money that Caesar used, whose image was on there. Okay, so putting an image or a mark on something is a way of claiming ownership of something. That was something that was done back then. But when we really get down to it, the earth belongs to God, and every individual on this earth belongs to God. Now, as regards to these kingdoms, various kingdoms, we do observe in Scripture where Satan, when tempting Christ, offers these kingdoms. Well, he couldn't offer something that didn't belong to him. So I would agree that, there are kingdoms here on earth, but those kingdoms, their true operator or individual that is behind it, I would say, based upon Scripture, is Satan, basically. But
I think I kind of understand where you're coming from, but here's the thing: at the end of the day, if my car is getting stolen, I don't have the resources to find out who took my car and get it back. And I am not going to expect God to come down and tell me where my car is. So I'm going to rely on the resources available to me, to my local government, because I have recognized property rights. In other words, they know that, yeah, you're right, some rando can't take your car that you have title to, and we're going to have an investigation to try and get it back. Or in the
So Artie is talking about property rights. Again, this whole concept of the government
having the authority to determine these rights is part of the problem, Artie. You see, you're stating that your property rights are dependent upon the government's recognition. And you're not seeing how, I get what you're saying as it pertains to someone, stealing something that belongs to you, okay? Something that you paid for, something, and now you want that system to protect your rights, okay? The problem exists when that very same system is the one doing the stealing. So, in the example of that time when I had my vehicle impounded, according to your own legal system, I'm supposed to have what is called due process. I didn't have due process. My vehicle was impounded and got taken away. Where was my due process in that process? There was none. And so ultimately, again, your reliance on the government is, I understand what you're saying for issues, to resolve issues. Really, that is what the purpose of government is supposed to be for, is to protect us. But when that protection goes so far as to violate us, violate our rights, violate our freedoms, then that's where we have a difference in understanding. Because you're someone who believes in the state more, and I'm a person that believes in individual sovereignty, God-given sovereignty. This is what He's given us, these inalienable rights and freedoms, and these aren't things that are given to us by the government, nor can it be taken away. Now, of course, if we speak historically as to what are rights and, whether or not the government can come and take them away, well, let's take a look at that. As I address as it pertained to the state of Hawaii, the Hawaiian people had no desire to become a state. They were forced into it. They were forced at the end of the barrel of a gun. And so, even the formation of these land areas that you're calling states, if it's done in such a way, such as that, or you take the state of California, because, of someone being chased down, from the American government to the Mexican leader signing a document giving away something that doesn't belong to him. That's just like, if I decide, hey, you know what, I'm going to give Artie's car away, and I'm going to sign this piece of paper, and the person who accepts that piece of paper says, oh, great. Well, now I have ownership of the car because, hey, this other person signed it to me. Well, I'm sorry. The problem is again, we're dealing on an issue that we're not accepting the fact of who the owner is. And the fact is, the owner is God. And so, I'm going to conclude this video here. I'm only about halfway through the audio that of the live feed, but this is already going into 2 hours.
And this is certainly going to be the longest recording I probably will ever do. I don't like to do long recordings like this because they get monotonous, and in my I'm sure everybody else's attention span is short, but mine is also short. And I figure, for the most part, I like to stick with about 15 minutes or so. So I might do a part 2 on this, addressing the other issues that we get into in the live feed. And I want to clarify that, at the beginning of the live feed, and also emails between myself and Artie, that we both agreed that we would have full capability to utilize these recordings as we each individually saw fit to use on our individual YouTube channel. So, and I did point out that that there would be no copyright for either individual to claim ownership of it, so that each individual would be able to utilize the video. So I just wanted to stipulate that in my video, in case it wasn't expressed in the live chat as it was between myself and Artie. We emailed each other, we agreed to that, and I expressed that I was recording the audio live chat because I don't have the same setup on my system to do a live chat as of yet, and I'm not quite familiar with all the legalities of that. But I will say that I do believe that it's a very good likelihood that there was some interference being made by individuals behind the scenes with our live chat. And so I think that's why there was some freezing up of the live chat and my laptop. This is something I haven't experienced before, but it's something that was clearly done. So, granted, I'm not very tech into computer stuff, so I don't know, but I highly suspect that, I do know that there's a group of anti-sovereigns that do specifically target sovereigns, and it's sad. I try to be respectful with people, and I believe in doing things in a loving Christian way. And so that being said, I hope that those of you that have heard this video or are sharing it, whatever, the takeaway that I would want you to go away with is very simple. The law of love, when we really incorporate that, when we treat each other with respect, and when we treat each other with love, that, we don't have to have all these law books. We don't have to worry about people hurting us or taking advantage of us or harming us, because our love for each other would ultimately guide us to not harm each other, and ultimately to actually help one another. And that's what my advocacy is for. And ultimately, as Christ said, his kingdom is no part of this world, neither is mine. And so I don't accept things that require me to surrender those rights that I've been endowed by my Creator, and nor should anyone else. So with that, I say, God bless you all, and take care. Please like and share.
Bye for now.